She paid for first class. But when a powerful businessman didn't like who was sitting next to him, suddenly she became a problem, accused, threatened, and given one choice: leave quietly or fight back. What happened next? No one saw coming. Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The soft hum of the city never quite disappeared, even this early in the morning. New York had a way of reminding you that it never stopped, no matter how much you needed a break. Dr. Simone Caldwell adjusted her coat as she stepped out of her brownstone, the cool air brushing against her skin. The streets were still damp from last night's rain, the scent of wet pavement mixing with the faint aroma of fresh coffee from a nearby cart. She hesitated for a second, considering grabbing a cup, but her driver was already waiting. Inside the black sedan, she settled in, letting out a slow breath. This wasn't just another morning. After nearly a week abroad, she was finally heading home to Los Angeles. The International Medical Conference in Zurich had been productive, exhausting, and, if she was honest, frustrating in ways she wished it wasn't. JFK Terminal 4, she told the driver, staring out the window as the city blurred past. Zurich had been what she expected. Long lectures, tight handshakes, polite conversations with doctors who didn't quite mask their skepticism. She had stood in front of a room full of men, mostly white, mostly older, and presented a surgical technique she had spent years refining. She had answered every question with precision, countered every challenge with data, yet she had still seen it. The slight narrowing of eyes, the skeptical glances exchanged. Dr. Patrick Sloan, a well-known cardiac surgeon from Boston, had been particularly blunt. "Impressive," he had said, his tone teetering between admiration and something less generous. "I suppose programs like yours are essential in creating more opportunities." He hadn't needed to say it outright. She knew what he meant. The unspoken question: would you be here if you didn't check the right diversity boxes? She had smiled, nodded, and moved on. There was no use arguing with men like him. She had done it too many times before. The car pulled up to JFK, the familiar chaos of the airport greeting her. People rushed past with rolling suitcases. Families hugged their goodbyes. Business travelers checked their watches impatiently. Simone moved through the terminal with practiced efficiency, her passport and boarding pass already in hand as she approached the check-in counter. The woman behind the desk barely glanced at her at first, her fingers flying over the keyboard. But then she looked up, hesitated, and flicked her eyes down at the boarding pass. "This is for first class," the woman said, as if there had been some mistake. Simone held her gaze, her expression unreadable. "Yes, it is." The agent blinked, then forced a smile, suddenly aware of how her hesitation might have come across. "Of course, let me get you checked in." It was subtle, barely a second of hesitation. But Simone had seen it before. She had felt it in boardrooms, hospitals, restaurants, places where people like her weren't expected, where her presence required a second look. She collected her ticket and made her way toward security, pushing down the irritation curling at the edges of her thoughts. This was how it always started. Small things, little moments. But today, she told herself, she was just going to get on the plane, fly home, and leave it all behind. At least, that had been the plan. Simone navigated through JFK's security line with the efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times before. The usual process: shoes off, laptop in the bin, arms raised, went smoothly, and within minutes, she was pulling her carry-on through the terminal, heading toward the first-class lounge. The polished floors reflected the overhead lights, the scent of brewed coffee and expensive cologne lingering in the air. She barely glanced at the luxury storefronts as she walked past them, her mind already fixed on getting to the gate and boarding without issue. At the entrance to the Blue Horizon Airways first-class lounge, a young receptionist with a practiced smile greeted her. "Good morning. Boarding pass, please." Simone handed it over. The woman's eyes scanned it, then flicked back up to her. And there it was again, that pause. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but Simone caught it. She had spent a lifetime catching it. "Dr. Caldwell," the woman said, adjusting her tone into something friendlier, more professional. "Right this way." Simone followed, settling into a plush leather chair near the window. She exhaled, forcing herself to relax. Don't start the trip by getting irritated, she told herself. Just get home. She pulled out her phone, responding to a few emails from her residents back at Summit Medical Center. A patient's post-op recovery was slower than expected. Another case had been rescheduled, things she would deal with once she was back in Los Angeles. The lounge was quiet, occupied mostly by suited businessmen absorbed in their phones or sipping espresso. A few discreetly eyed her, their curiosity evident. She ignored them. It wasn't until the boarding announcement for Flight BH302 was called that she stood, collected her things, and made her way to the gate. The first-class cabin was spacious, designed for comfort. Wide leather seats, crisp linen pillows, the faint scent of citrus and lavender in the air. Simone found her seat, 2A window, and stowed her carry-on overhead before settling in. She glanced around, noting the other passengers. And then, him. Seated in 2B, right beside her, was Richard Langford. She recognized him immediately, though they had never met. His name was in headlines, his face in magazines. A high-powered financier known for his ruthless business tactics. Older, mid-60s, with the air of someone used to getting what he wanted. Langford, unlike the other passengers, did not bother with subtlety. He stared at her, openly assessing, before letting out a quiet, humorless chuckle. Well, he said, voice low but perfectly audible, this is a surprise. Simone did not react. She had no interest in playing whatever game he was setting up. Instead, she turned her attention to her seatbelt, clicking it into place. But Langford wasn't done. Didn't expect to see one of you up here, he mused. Doctor, right? Or something like that? Simone exhaled slowly through her nose. She had a decision to make. She could respond, put him in his place, make a statement, or she could do what she had done countless times before, ignore it and move on. Before she could decide, a flight attendant approached. A tall woman with blonde hair pulled into a neat chignon, her uniform crisp and pressed. Heather McIntyre, the first-class lead attendant. Mr. Langford, Dr. Caldwell, she said, offering a professional but somehow colder smile to Simone. Can I get you anything before we take off? Langford smirked. A better seat? Heather hesitated. It was a fraction of a second, but it was enough. We're at full capacity in first class today, she said smoothly. But I can check if there's a seat in... Don't, Simone said, her voice even. I paid for this seat. Heather's lips pressed into a thin line. Langford chuckled again, but this time there was something sharper in it. I'm sure it was a clerical error, he murmured, settling back in his seat. Heather hesitated again, then with a tight nod, turned and walked away. Simone stared straight ahead, fingers resting against her lap. She felt the weight of Langford's gaze, but she did not acknowledge it. The engines roared to life. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. The plane rolled onto the runway, gaining speed. As the wheels lifted off the ground, Simone felt it. Not just the shift of altitude, but the shift of something else entirely. This flight wasn't going to be simple. She knew that now. And Richard Langford? He wasn't finished. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane leveled off, the steady hum of the engines filling the space. Simone exhaled, pressing her head back against the seat. She had flown enough times to know this was the moment, right after takeoff, when people usually settled in, flipping through magazines, ordering drinks, closing their eyes for a nap. Not Richard Langford. The man beside her sat too upright, his fingers tapping idly against the armrest. It was clear he had something on his mind, and Simone had a strong feeling it had to do with her. She ignored him, retrieving her tablet from her bag. If she was going to be trapped in this seat for the next several hours, she might as well catch up on some medical journals. A flight attendant appeared beside them, this time a younger woman, Alyssa, judging by the name tag. She was smiling, professional, the kind of cheerfulness that came with first-class service. Would either of you care for something to drink? She asked. Langford didn't hesitate. Scotch. Neat. Alyssa turned to Simone, who barely looked up. Water's fine. Langford chuckled, low and amused. Smart choice. Wouldn't want to lose control, would we? Simone didn't react. She knew what he was doing, throwing bait, waiting to see if she'd bite. She wouldn't. Alyssa returned quickly, placing Langford's drink in front of him. He lifted the glass, rolling the amber liquid inside before taking a slow sip. Then, as if it were just casual conversation, he said, "So, where exactly does someone like you practice medicine?" There it was. Simone closed the journal on her tablet, folding her hands in her lap. "Los Angeles," she said simply. Langford smirked. "Of course. That makes sense." She didn't ask him to elaborate. She knew where this was going. Heather McIntyre, the first-class lead attendant, reappeared at the front of the cabin, her gaze flickering toward their row. Simone didn't miss it, the way Heather's eyes lingered just a second too long, as if she was waiting, watching. Langford took another sip of his drink, setting the glass down with deliberate ease. "I imagine it's rewarding, the whole changing lives thing." He paused. "Or do you mostly work with specialized cases?" Simone held his gaze. "Every case is specialized when it comes to heart surgery." Langford let out a breath of amusement. "Ah, I see. Must be nice to know you're in such high demand." There was no mistaking the implication. Simone had spent years hearing variations of this. The idea that her success wasn't just about talent, hard work, or the countless nights spent in residency. It was about filling quotas, about being the diversity hire. She had let comments like this slide before. Not tonight. She turned slightly, facing him directly. "You seem very invested in my career, Mr. Langford." The smirk stayed, but something in his expression shifted. "Just making conversation." "No," she said. "You're doing something else." Langford tilted his head. "And what's that?" Simone leaned back, eyes steady. "You're measuring me, trying to figure out how I got here, wondering if I belong." His smile faltered, just slightly. Heather McIntyre appeared beside them again, her voice perfectly pleasant, but her eyes sharp. "Everything all right here?" Simone didn't look away from Langford. "Why wouldn't it be?" Heather hesitated, then offered a tight smile. "Of course. If you need anything, let me know." Langford watched her walk away before turning back to Simone, amusement flickering back into place. "Quite the attitude," he mused. She just smiled. "Likewise." For the first time since they boarded, he had nothing to say. Dinner service began not long after. Flight attendants gliding through the cabin with trays of plated meals. The scent of roasted chicken and warm bread filled the air, the soft clinking of utensils against fine china breaking the silence. Simone barely touched her food, not because she wasn't hungry, but because she knew somehow that this wasn't over. She was right. Langford, it seemed, had a new approach. Instead of talking to her, he now acted as if she didn't exist at all. When the flight attendant came by to refill drinks, he spoke over her. When the dessert menu was offered, he leaned toward Alyssa and murmured, "I assume you have something more refined?" As if whatever she had chosen was beneath him. It was childish, transparent, but it wasn't just for his own amusement. It was a performance, one she knew was meant to be seen. And Heather? She saw. She passed by their row often, glancing between them, her gaze unreadable. Simone recognized the type, the kind of person who thought silence was neutrality, but in reality, it was complicity. And then, just as Simone had begun to think it couldn't get more ridiculous, Langford set down his coffee cup a little too forcefully. The dark liquid sloshed over the rim, splashing onto Simone's sleeve. "Oh," Langford said, the very picture of mock concern. "My apologies. Clumsy of me." Heather was there in seconds, as if she had been waiting for something like this. "Dr. Caldwell," she said smoothly, already offering a napkin. "Would you like to move to a different seat? I'm sure we could arrange—" "No," Simone cut in, dabbing at the stain. "I'm fine." Heather hesitated, just like the woman at the check-in counter, just like the receptionist at the lounge. All of them had the same pause, the same calculation. Langford smirked, watching the interaction with clear amusement. "She's just trying to be helpful, you know." Simone looked at Heather. "Are you?" Heather blinked, caught off guard. I just thought—" "I appreciate the offer," Simone said, her tone cool but firm. "But I paid for this seat, and I plan on staying in it." The cabin felt quieter somehow, like the other passengers had tuned in without making it obvious. Langford swirled the remnants of his coffee, still wearing that smug expression. But Simone saw something else now, something just beneath the surface. Annoyance. She wasn't playing along. And that wasn't part of his plan. The plane continued forward, cutting through the dark sky. But Simone knew. They were far from cruising altitude. Something was coming, and whatever it was, she would be ready. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, but to Simone, the air felt different now. Heavier, as if the weight of the moment hadn't quite settled yet. Richard Langford had tried. He had measured her, tested her, and, when that failed, he had escalated. Yet she was still here, still in her seat, still unmoved. He didn't like that. The flight attendants began clearing dinner trays, moving efficiently through the aisle. Langford leaned back in his seat, sipping what was left of his coffee, his gaze unfocused. But Simone knew better. He wasn't unfocused. He was calculating. And Heather McIntyre, she was watching. The first-class lead attendant had kept a close eye on them all evening, appearing at just the right moments, as if she were waiting for something. An opportunity, maybe. A justification. Simone had spent her life reading people like them, the ones who thought they were subtle, who hid their intentions behind tight smiles and polite tones. She knew what was coming before it happened. Heather approached their row once again, this time with a different kind of energy. No warmth, no forced hospitality, just purpose. "Dr. Caldwell," she began, her voice controlled but laced with something unmistakable. "Would you mind stepping to the galley for a moment? There's something I need to discuss with you." Simone did mind. She glanced at Langford, catching the way he barely concealed his smirk. So this was it then. A slow breath, a steadying pause, and then she unbuckled her seatbelt. "Of course." Heather led the way down the narrow aisle toward the first-class galley. The space was cramped, the soft glow of the cabin lights casting a cool hue over the metal surfaces. Simone crossed her arms, waiting. Heather didn't stall. "We've received a complaint," she said. Simone blinked. "From whom?" Heather kept her expression carefully neutral. "I can't disclose that." Simone almost laughed. "Almost. That's convenient." Heather's jaw tightened. "The complaint is that you've been making some of the passengers uncomfortable." Simone let the words settle. She could have asked what exactly had been said. She could have demanded specifics. But she already knew the answer. Uncomfortable. It was always that word. The safest, most ambiguous accusation. Not disruptive, not aggressive, not anything that could be easily challenged. Just uncomfortable. Because how do you argue with a feeling? She exhaled through her nose, keeping her voice even. "And what exactly would you like me to do about someone else's discomfort?" Heather hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. "There is an open seat in business class," she said, her tone just a bit too rehearsed. "We thought you might be more comfortable there." There it was. Heather wasn't asking. She was giving Simone an out, a chance to step aside quietly, to move, to disappear, because people like Richard Langford weren't expected to move. Simone let out a short, humorless breath. "And if I decline?" Heather's smile barely faltered. "Then I'd have to escalate the situation." Simone's fingers curled into her palms. Heather thought she had played this well, made it seem like a choice. But Simone saw it for what it was, a threat. And if she backed down, if she left her seat, then Langford would win. Simone lifted her chin slightly. "I paid for first class. I am staying in first class." Heather held her gaze. 1 second. 2. Then a clipped nod. "Very well." She turned and walked away, her posture rigid. Simone stood there for a beat longer, letting the moment settle in her bones. Then she turned on her heel and walked back to her seat. Langford was waiting. His smirk widened as she sat down. "Everything all right?" Simone didn't bother answering. She simply fastened her seatbelt and looked straight ahead. The game wasn't over. Not yet. The cabin had settled into an eerie kind of quiet. Most passengers were either dozing off or watching their in-flight entertainment. But Simone? She was wide awake. Something had shifted. Langford hadn't spoken to her since she returned. But that didn't mean he was done. And Heather? She wasn't finished either. It was clear now. They were waiting for the right moment. It came sooner than she expected. One of the junior flight attendants rushed into the first-class cabin, looking uneasy. She whispered something to Heather, who frowned, nodded, and made her way back towards Simone's seat. Heather stopped beside her row. "Dr. Caldwell," she said, voice calm but loaded, "I need to speak with you again." Simone didn't move. "Is this about another complaint?" she asked dryly. Heather's jaw tightened. "It's more serious than that." That got Simone's attention. She slowly unbuckled her seatbelt, standing. As she followed Heather back to the galley, she caught a flicker of movement in her peripheral vision. Langford, leaning back in his seat, arms crossed. Simone knew before Heather even spoke. "This is about something you allegedly said earlier in the flight," Heather began, her voice unnervingly controlled. Simone frowned. "Allegedly," Heather nodded. "A passenger claims they overheard you making comments about a potential security risk." Simone stared at her. For the first time, she felt a sharp chill run through her spine. Because this wasn't just an inconvenience. This was dangerous, and she knew exactly who was behind it. Simone inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "That's a lie." Heather didn't blink. "Nevertheless, we have to take any security concerns seriously." Simone clenched her jaw. "And what happens next?" Heather folded her hands in front of her. "We're speaking to the captain now. If deemed necessary, we may need to involve authorities upon landing." Authorities? The word hit like a hammer. Simone had faced discrimination her whole life. She had dealt with doubt, dismissal, and the occasional subtle inconvenience. But this was something else. This was an accusation meant to ruin her. And Richard Langford? He was finally playing his hand. The air in the first-class galley felt tighter now, like the walls had somehow closed in an inch. Simone stood still, her hands at her sides, her heartbeat steady, but her mind racing. She had expected pushback, resistance, even hostility. But not this. Heather McIntyre, standing in front of her with that same cold professionalism, didn't waver. "Dr. Caldwell, I understand that this may seem—" "No," Simone cut in, her voice even but firm. "You don't understand." Heather's lips parted slightly, as if surprised that Simone had spoken to her like that. But Simone didn't care. Not anymore. She took a step closer, just enough to make Heather slightly uncomfortable, but not enough to let her accuse her of aggression. "Someone has accused me of making a security threat. Do you even understand what that means?" Heather didn't answer right away. That told Simone everything she needed to know. Heather knew exactly what she was doing. "I'm just following protocol," Heather finally said, tilting her head slightly. "Whose protocol?" Simone asked. Heather exhaled, her patience thinning. "Dr. Caldwell, you don't have an answer." Simone let out a slow breath, forcing herself to remain composed. "I didn't say anything about security. I didn't say anything about this flight or anyone on it. You and I both know that." Heather's fingers twitched at her sides, a small tell. "I'm going back to my seat," Simone said simply, turning on her heel. "You should wait here," Heather called after her. Simone paused, looking over her shoulder. "Or what?" Heather's mouth opened, then closed. Simone held her gaze for a beat longer before walking away. As she made her way back up the aisle, she felt it. The shift. Eyes on her. Passengers watching but pretending not to. And then there was him. Richard Langford sat exactly as she had left him. Calm, confident, untouched. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly as she passed. A victory already won. Simone took her seat, buckled her belt, exhaled, and waited. It wasn't long before the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to assure you that everything is perfectly fine on board. However, as a precautionary measure, we are coordinating with security upon arrival at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport." Simone's stomach dropped. The words had been carefully chosen, but the message was clear. This wasn't over. She kept her expression neutral, her back straight. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The flight continued in unbearable silence. First class had settled into a forced calm, passengers pretending they weren't waiting to see how this played out. Then, a movement beside her. Langford shifted, stretching lazily before turning his head toward her. Looks like they're taking this seriously. Simone glanced at him, her face unreadable. I suppose that's what happens when people lie. His smirk deepened. Or when people say the wrong thing. She tilted her head slightly. That's the thing, though. I didn't. Langford didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew the truth. The plane began its descent. Simone kept her hands folded neatly in her lap, her breath steady. She had spent her life playing this game, walking the line, choosing when to push and when to stay silent. But this time, this wasn't just about her. She had a decision to make. The seatbelt sign chimed on. Langford picked up his empty glass, swirling the ice cubes lazily. The final move was his, or so he thought. Simone was done playing, and when they landed, she'd make sure they all knew it. The descent into Phoenix was steady, but the tension in the first-class cabin was anything but. Simone kept her posture upright, her hands resting lightly on her lap. Every breath measured, every thought sharp. Langford had set this up piece by piece, and Heather had played her part perfectly. Now they were just waiting for her to break. She wouldn't. The seatbelt sign flickered off as the wheels touched the ground, and immediately passengers reached for their belongings. But no one stood. They were waiting. For the show. Then the intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. We ask that all passengers remain seated as we complete our final checks. First-class passengers will deplane momentarily. A pause. And Dr. Caldwell, we ask that you remain on board for a moment to speak with security. There it was. Langford exhaled, a quiet sound of satisfaction, his fingers tapping idly against the armrest. Simone didn't flinch. She waited, watched. A flight attendant appeared in the aisle, giving Heather a small nod. Heather, in turn, took a breath, schooling her features into that practiced, polite mask. Dr. Caldwell, she said, voice even, please remain seated. Simone glanced at her, then, deliberately, calmly unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. Heather's eyes flickered with surprise. Dr. Caldwell, if I'm being detained, Simone said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the other passengers, you need to say so clearly. Heather's lips pressed together. It's just a routine matter. A routine matter that requires security waiting for me at the gate? Langford shifted beside her, clearly enjoying this. Heather hesitated. We just need to clear up a misunderstanding. Simone tilted her head slightly. Then I'll leave with everyone else, unless you're stopping me. Heather blinked. She hadn't expected resistance. Langford let out a quiet chuckle. Now, doctor. No need to make a scene. Simone turned her head to him, her expression unreadable. You've done enough of that for both of us. Langford smirked, but there was something off about it now. The control was slipping. And then, a voice from behind them. She's right. Simone turned. A man, middle-aged, salt and pepper hair, seated a few rows back. A businessman, judging by his suit. She should leave with the rest of us, the man said. If there's a real issue, deal with it outside. This doesn't look good. Heather hesitated, and that was all Simone needed. She grabbed her carry-on, adjusted the strap over her shoulder, and without another word, walked. Heather didn't stop her. Langford didn't move. And as she stepped off the plane, Simone knew. The game had shifted. The terminal was bright, too bright after the dim lighting of the plane. Waiting just past the jet bridge were two uniformed airport security officers. Simone squared her shoulders. She would not cower. One of the officers, a man in his 50s with a no-nonsense air, stepped forward. Dr. Caldwell? She nodded. That's me. We just need a moment of your time. Simone turned slightly, noticing Langford stepping off the plane behind her. Watching, waiting. She didn't give him the satisfaction. She turned back to the officer, her voice steady. Am I being detained? The officer hesitated. No, ma'am. Simone exhaled, a slow, measured breath. Then I have a flight to catch. She stepped past them, kept walking, didn't look back. And Richard Langford, for the first time since they met, he was the one left speechless. Simone walked through the bustling terminal of Phoenix Sky Harbor, her carry-on rolling smoothly behind her, the sharp scent of coffee mixed with the faint hum of airport chatter. She was free to go, but the fight wasn't over. She pulled out her phone. Missed calls, messages piling up. Dr. Avery Chang, one of her closest colleagues at Summit Medical Center, had left a voicemail. "Simone, call me as soon as you land. Something's happening." She frowned, ducking into a quiet corner near a row of empty seats. Something was happening? She hit call. Avery picked up on the first ring. "Simone, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said, watching passengers move past her. "Why?" A pause, then, "You're trending." Simone blinked. "Excuse me?" "Someone posted a video from your flight." She felt it before she saw it, that slow, creeping shift of reality, the moment you realize that something private has become very, very public. She opened her browser, and there it was, a blurry phone recording, taken from somewhere in first class, capturing Heather standing over her, the accusation hanging between them. The video wasn't long, just enough to catch Heather's measured tone, Simone's refusal to move, and the weight of the moment as passengers watched in silence. The caption, "This black doctor was accused of being a security threat after a white businessman felt uncomfortable. We see you, Dr. Caldwell." The comments were already flooded. She stood her ground. Respect. How many times does this have to happen before people realize the problem isn't us? I wonder if the guy next to her even realizes how much he just exposed himself. Simone exhaled, pressing her fingers against her temple. "What the hell?" she murmured. "Yeah," Avery said. "This thing is getting big. And the hospital—" Simone's stomach tightened. "What about it?" Avery hesitated. "Dr. Sloan called an emergency meeting." Of course he did. Dr. Patrick Sloan, the head of Summit's cardiology department, had never been subtle about his opinions on people like her. And now, she had just become a headline. By the time Simone landed in Los Angeles, her inbox was a war zone. Emails from journalists, requests for interviews, a message from her hospital's public relations office, asking her to avoid any further media engagement until things were assessed internally. She ignored them all. Her ride was waiting just outside baggage claim. As she slid into the back seat, her phone buzzed again, this time a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't pick up. Almost. "Hello? Dr. Caldwell." The voice was smooth, controlled. A woman. "My name is Lisa Tran. I'm an investigative journalist with the Los Angeles Chronicle." Simone's grip on her phone tightened. "I'd like to talk to you about what happened on Flight BH302, Lisa continued, "and about what happens next." Simone stared out the window as the city lights blurred past. What happens next? That was the question, wasn't it? She could stay quiet, let this pass, go back to work, pretend it was just another moment in a lifetime of moments like it. Or she could step forward, her choice. This time she wouldn't be forced into silence. She took a slow breath. Then she said, "Tell me what you need to know." Lisa Tran was efficient, too efficient. Within minutes, she had laid out exactly why she had called. "I've been following cases like this for years," Lisa said over the phone. "Incidents where people of color, especially black professionals, are challenged, questioned, removed, all under the vague excuse of making others uncomfortable." Simone pinched the bridge of her nose, exhaustion pressing into her skull. This wasn't news to her. She had lived it. "What happened on that plane," Lisa continued, "was textbook. And now people are paying attention." Simone let out a slow breath. "And you want me to speak?" Lisa didn't hesitate. "Yes." The weight of that request settled over Simone. Her life had been built on precision, on control. In the operating room, everything was measured, calculated. This question mark. This was chaos. If she spoke out, it wouldn't just be about her. It would be about every patient who trusted her, every young black girl watching, every doctor who had fought twice as hard to be seen as half as competent. She rubbed a hand over her face. "I need time to think," she said finally. Lisa was quiet for a beat. Then, "I understand, but you don't have much of it." The call ended. Simone stared at the screen for a long moment before tossing the phone onto the seat beside her. She wasn't ready for this, but ready or not, it was happening. By the time she walked into Summit Medical Center the next morning, Simone knew. The shift was subtle, but she felt it. The way people looked at her just a second too long. The hushed conversations that stopped when she walked by. She had seen this before. And then, the email. A mandatory meeting with Dr. Patrick Sloan and the hospital board. Simone sat in the conference room, arms crossed, as Sloan folded his hands in front of him, giving her that practiced, polite expression she had grown used to. "This situation is complicated," he began. Simone arched a brow. "Is it?" Sloan exhaled, as if he were the one burdened by all of this. "We've been contacted by several media outlets, and unfortunately, some of our donors have concerns." There it was. It was never about right or wrong. It was about power. Simone leaned forward slightly. "Let me guess. You want me to issue a statement saying it was all a misunderstanding?" Sloan didn't deny it. "It would help ease tensions?" Simone let out a soft laugh. "Tensions or your donor's discomfort?" Sloan's jaw tightened. "You have a bright future here, Doctor Caldwell," he said carefully. "I would hate to see this complicate things for you." A warning, a threat disguised as concern. Simone held his gaze unflinching, and in that moment her choice became clear. She could bend, apologize, make it easy for them, or she could burn the whole damn thing down. She stood. Sloan frowned. "Where are you going?" Simone picked up her phone, scrolling to Lisa Tran's number. "To do the thing you're most afraid of," she said. Then she walked out. The hospital doors swung open as Simone stepped outside, her phone pressed against her ear. The Los Angeles sun beat down, but she barely noticed. She was done hesitating. Lisa Tran picked up on the second ring. "I'm in," Simone said. Lisa didn't miss a beat. "Good. We go public tomorrow." The decision had been made. No backing out now. That night, Simone sat at her kitchen table, staring at the laptop screen. The interview had already been scheduled. The world would hear her side. She wasn't naive. She knew exactly what was coming. There would be pushback, people calling her a troublemaker, a liar, a woman who didn't know her place. She had spent her whole career proving herself. Now she wasn't asking for permission. Her phone buzzed. A text from Avery Chang. "Proud of you. They won't like this, but they won't stop you." Simone let out a slow breath. No, they wouldn't. Not this time. The studio lights were bright, blinding almost. Simone sat across from Lisa Tran, the cameras rolling. No script, no safety net. Lisa didn't waste time. "Dr. Caldwell," she began, "let's talk about Flight BH302. Tell me what happened." Simone exhaled. Then she told the truth. She spoke about the accusations, about Heather McIntyre, about Richard Langford and his calculated cruelty, and she spoke about more than just the flight, about every moment of doubt she had faced, every pause when she entered a room, every time someone had questioned whether she deserved to be there. Lisa listened. The cameras recorded. And outside that studio, people were listening. By the next morning, the interview had spread across social media. It wasn't just a story, it was a movement. The hospital issued a carefully worded statement, distancing themselves from the incident, but it was too late. Richard Langford, silent. Heather McIntyre, nowhere to be found. But Simone, she was louder than ever. Her future had changed, not because of them, but because of her. And as she walked into Summit Medical Center that afternoon, she knew the truth. They could try to stop her, but they never would. Power doesn't always look like the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to move. Sometimes it's the choice to stand firm when the world expects you to back down. Dr. Simone Caldwell didn't just defend her seat, she defended her right to be seen, to be heard, to exist without permission. And in doing so, she sparked something bigger than herself. So what would you have done in her place? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between staying silent or standing up? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more stories that challenge, inspire, and make you think, hit that subscribe button. There's so much more to uncover.